Beautiful message from Mauricio Quintero, and it's entitled, Is Anything Impossible for God? People tend to take the saying, nothing is impossible for God, very lightly, to the point that it becomes a cliche. In this case, let's examine two possibilities for the same issue. Bamidbar Numbers 11 begins with a complaint. And it happened that the people began to complain about their bad luck in the ears of the Eternal. I wondered, how are the people unlucky? What did they call bad luck? This whole episode began with an illusion, since they complained about the lack of something that they actually did have. Apparently, it started in their homes or in their communities and was not in public, because up to verse 2, Moses realized what the people had done, and when they asked him to pray to the Lord to quench the fire. In verse 1 it says, "And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled." It was the Eternal who heard this complaint, because his ears are everywhere, and he always hears. And the verse indicates that his fire consumed the unworthy. When we read these verses too quickly, we might miss certain aspects of human behavior. When we receive God's blessings of his protection, his feeding, care, and the provision of our other basic needs, the desire for more tends to consume us, and that turns into a bottomless pit, as our prophet Jeremiah in chapter 79 said, "The heart is deceitful above all things, and it is desperately wicked. Who can know it?" Like any other human beings throughout our history, the people felt gratitude for what they took for granted and for what they thought they were entitled to as their right, as if they were so important. How many people have I seen enter a place with an attitude of arrogance, as if those around them should bow to them and should be grateful for their presence? Pride is born out of selfishness, and this bears the fruit of ingratitude. This lack of gratitude causes us to raise our expectations about what we receive from God, who knows the best from us, thinking that we deserve something we haven't worked for. James, or Yaakov, described this in the Messianic writings in James 4, 1-3. "Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desire for pleasure, that war in your members? You lust and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask incorrectly, so that you may spend it on your pleasures." And this was the next level. We were a people, who went to the right, Israel, and then the rabble, the Asafsuf, appeared, which means they were a rude and vulgar people. The sages of Israel called them Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, who were possessed by a strong craving. We're clear that in Judaism there is no possession of spirits, as is believed in the West. But what the scriptures want to tell us is that their desire seized their free will, and they no longer had a choice because they allowed their desire to take control of them. As an example, it's like a child who throws a tantrum over a toy. At first he wants the toy and cannot live without it, but soon the toy becomes an obsession and a purpose in life. The desire takes hold of him, causing him to throw himself down to the ground in a store, possessed by his desire. And at this point, neither reason nor punishment, nor the voice of his father resounding on him works, because his desire controls his senses. He doesn't hear, he doesn't see, he doesn't feel, he doesn't perceive smells or tastes, and he focuses all his energy as if his purpose in life is meaningless without the toy that he wants so much. In this case, a desire entered the crowd, with which when I first read it, I thought was gluttony, but then I realized it was something else. V'yamru miachalenu basar. Who will give us meat to eat? If their desire had truly been to eat, which is a basic human need, it made me wonder, didn't the Eternal give them cattle when they left Egypt? Didn't they have animals to eat that had reproduced during their 40 years in the desert? Weren't they entitled to a portion of the meat offered as korbanot? Did they receive only manna in the desert? Wouldn't the correct statement have been, we want to eat meat, but it implies who will give us? Who will give us implies that what we want is to be served by another for free, deserving without working for it. And it's an expression of selfishness and lust. God had established a system of merits through the fulfillment of the commandments. And the problem with this crowd is that they desired everything by grace. Sound familiar? This whim reveals that they first wanted meat, then fish, then they ended up with quail. So the problem was not the meat itself, it was their distorted vision about acknowledging who they were and who God is. That's why the Eternal called them unworthy. Unworthy is someone who does not deserve favor from the Eternal. It's not knowing our position before Him. According to them, they ate for nothing in Egypt, Numbers 11:5. Was that true? Of course not. Then they said in 11:6, there's nothing at all beside this manna. Also false, because this desire became social and public. Moses watched an ongoing tantrum, as we read in chapter 11, verse 10, that contaminated the entire community. The other problem that we see is Moses, as a leader, who also complained to God that his leadership of this people was imposed upon him. We can see how Lashon Hara affected the entire community, even the leaders. It says in chapter 11:13, where shall I find meat to give to all these people? For they trouble me with their weeping, saying, give us meat that we may eat. To the question asked by the people, where? It's alluding to the leaders. But something that saved Moses was his humility, when he recognized that he could not stand alone, that he required help. To write his weaknesses in a book for future generations must, must have taken quite a bit of courage. When he told God, I cannot bear this responsibility alone, I don't want this position, we see that he didn't try to appear as a super Moses. Thanks to his humility, he was an example to the others. For in verse 17, God said, and I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the Spirit which is upon you and put it upon them. Then Moses doubted the word of the Eternal again, according to verses 21 to 23, to which the Eternal responds, is the Lord's arm too short? Is his power limited? Later we see that God sent quail to ease their strong desire, exhibited by the fact that they gathered so many of them. And while they were still eating, the Eternal's anger was kindled, and many fell sick. We learn that when we seek our passions irrationally, we are not seeking the best that the Eternal has for us, which bring life, but we end up with something that might seem good, but ends poorly. As Mishlei 14:12 said, there is a way which seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. At the end, we witness two results. Please put your thing on mute. At the end, we witness two results. First, that of the proud kivrot hatava, tomb of the desires, and second, that of humility, the connection with God through the manifestation of prophecy. In Numbers 11:25 to 30, the story of Eldad and Medad and the 70 men who prophesied. In Zechariah 4:6, it says, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. If we look at the history of this parasha, we see that it was not by force, which means human impulse. It was not by power, that is, human leadership, but was by his wind, his ruach. 11:31, Veruach nasa me'et Adonai, that it manifested and gave each one what they deserved. Although the context of Zechariah can be interpreted differently, the similarity was quite clear to me. To reflect, do we live each day with gratitude or complaints? Do we have whims or needs? Are we sure and trust that God gives us the best for our good? Are we aware that God can do everything and that there is nothing impossible for him? How do we ask for his goodness? With pride or with humility? Yeshua said, there is nothing impossible for God 3 times. In Mark 10:27, in Matthew 19:26, and in Luke 1:37. The Eternal helps us to live in peace as we thank him daily for the portion that he provides us for our own good. Shabbat Shalom.